you see Vladimir Putin surrounded by, I think, about 300-400 people. This lasts like 3-4 hours. He's had a bad week. I mean, let's be clear. He's had a bad 2 weeks because of the assassination of the general in Moscow, but also because of Syria.
Absolutely. And you see, this is a highly scripted event, and he uses it as a sort of demonstration of his control over the political scene. It's got started off this morning dominated by questions around the economy. It just came out this morning that inflation is now at 9.5%. Now, that's partly due to sanctions, as well as his record spending on the war. But, you know, inflation is beginning to bite, and it's not responding to the Russian central bank's efforts to cool it. Interest rates are now at 21%. And are expected to move up further. And there's a lot of political tension over this, with various figures, business leaders, complaining about the high interest rates and warning of potential bankruptcies. So we'll see how many questions he gets on the economy during the course of this event.
I mean, I find this event quite fascinating because it's on the course, you know, over like 3-4 hours. Are they real questions, or are they, you know, hard enough that they make him look good, but they're still very managed?
I think exactly the latter. They're edited heavily. They're meant to allow him to show off the issues that he thinks are important, as well as to try to stamp out criticism. And I think one of the things he's been trying to do is separate the rising inflation from the war, to try to demonstrate that these are two unconnected events and that he's got the situation under control. He did say today that inflation is a worrying signal. But remember, there were additional sanctions a couple of weeks ago on Russian banks, in particular Gazprom Bank, which had been used for energy payments globally. And that caused the ruble to fall to 113, 114 to the dollar. And he had to actually come out and say, there's no reason to panic, and that's never a good sign.
That's never a good sign. And also, our most read story when it comes to Russia is actually, you know, the central banker, Elvira Nabiullina, who for such a long time was considered one of the best, is now also under attack from officials who say that she's destroying the economy with these higher interest rates. So when we look at the Trump administration incoming, how does this change Vladimir Putin's thinking on what he wants to do with Ukraine? Does it change?
Well, the only person the only figure that can be attacked is Nabiullina. He cannot be directly attacked. So in a weird way, the attacks on her are an indirect attack on the situation broadly. You know, he has said, you know, he's ready for negotiations, but in reality, what he wants is going to be very difficult to come to an agreement with Ukraine. He wants Ukraine to be neutral, not to join NATO, to have caps on its military, and it's hard to see how Ukraine will be able to agree to that. And I do think I'll be looking out to see if he gets questions on the murder of this general, Kirillov, which was a remarkable attack. And I think there will be fallout from this. I think we're going to have to see what kind of response Russia has to this, whether it's a stepped-up response in Ukraine or perhaps on a NATO country.
So, so I'm fascinated by this because I've heard, like, look, this is just a tactical kind of, it was a thing to do tactically to, you know, being closer to not losing in the war on Ukraine's part. But I've also been told this is a great way to show off to Donald Trump, to say, you know, look at what us Ukrainians can do so that he supports Ukraine more. What do you think that was?
Well, absolutely. And, you know, this shows the sophistication of the Ukrainian intelligence operatives that they were able to pull this off. And, yeah, I think it is meant to show that they do have power. They are able to disrupt and bring the war home to Russia, which I think is really important to try to undermine support within Russia for the war. But Ukraine is in a really difficult position with Trump coming in and vowing to end the war in a day, with waning support in the U.S. for continued military and financial aid for Ukraine.